Pawle, czy możemy spróbować? Can we check if everybody here translation, because it is partly in the beginning in Polish, partly in English.
Tłumaczenie. I am now on
Do you hear translation? Who has problem with translation? Please
Can you
to hear
the translation into English?
Okay, once again.
Can you hear me?
So,
I'm working
także
in
kto
English.
miałby kłopoty?
Any problems? And now I'm turning to Polish.
So in beginning it will be more in Polish, after it will be more in English. Miss Rector, you will speak English? Yes? Okay. I will speak Polish.
And once again,
Anybody has problems
English.
yet? Oh, it's okay?
Is the translation working okay or not? Channel 4 is for English.
Is it okay? Pawle, czy możesz coś powiedzieć po polsku albo po angielsku do słuchawek? Katrin, you don't hear? Olu, podajcie jeszcze inne na zmianę. Ola, podajcie inne słuchawki. You just make it up.
And now the English channel, it's channel 4. Please check your device whether it's set on 4.
Nie. It is a channel 4 for translation from English to Polish, channel 4. From Polish to English, channel 4. Ale ja muszę mówić po polsku i teraz Paweł po angielsku i sprawdźmy, czy jest ok.
All right, and now we are checking channel
Okay?
4.
Okay, it looks like everything is okay.
All right, we're done.
Okay. Szanowni Państwo, bardzo serdecznie chciałam przywitać
Ladies
Centrum
and
Dialogu imienia
gentlemen,
Marka Edelmana,
I cordially welcome you to the
a
Marek
także w
Edelman
imieniu Centrum
Dialogue
Badań
Center,
Kultury
as
Żydowskiego
well
Uniwersytetu
as on behalf
Łódzkiego.
of the Jewish Studies at the
Szanowni
University
Państwo,
of
jesteśmy w
Łódź.
miejscu, które
We
zostało
are in a
stworzone przez
place
miasto
that has been
Łódź jako
organized
instytucja
by the
kultury,
City of Łódź as
które działa
the
ponad podziałami.
Cultural Institute, and
O, jeszcze widzę, że jest.
I see there are some problems.
Naszym podstawowym celem
Our
jest prowadzenie
primary
działalności
goal
edukacyjno-kulturalnej,
is running
popularyzowanie
the
dorobku różnych
cultural
kultur,
activities
promowanie
related
wielokulturowego,
to
wieloetnicznego
various
dziedzictwa Łodzi,
cultures,
ze szczególnym uwzględnieniem
and
kultury
we
żydowskiej, ale
particularly
także upowszechnianie idei
concentrate
tolerancji
on Jewish
i
culture
przeciwdziałanie przejawom
well as the,
nietolerancji, rasizmu, ksenofobii, braku szacunku dla ludzi o odmiennych
and,
poglądach.
respect
Od
for
2015
people of
roku wydajemy książki Urodzonej w
various,
Łodzi Chavy Rosenfarb, które są tłumaczone bezpośrednio z języka Yiddish.
beliefs and approaches.
To autorka,
We
która rodzinnemu
publish
miastu
books
poświęciła
from Yiddish and
ponad
English,
3000 stron, a właściwie
and,
całe swoje życie.
Chava Rosenfarb
Cieszę się, że w tym
spent
roku
all
Rada
her
Miejska
life
Łodzi
to write
ogłosiła
about
rok setnych
Łódź.
urodzin Chavy Rosenfarb
And this is
rokiem
the
Chavy Rosenfarb.
year of
A
Chava
pięknym finałem
Rosenfarb.
tego całego
And a
roku jest
wonderful
właśnie
finale
konferencja,
of
która za
this
chwilę się rozpocznie.
year is a
Międzynarodowa
conference that is
konferencja
going to
naukowa
start in a
Chava
moment.
Rosenfarb i
It's
żydowskie
an
pisarki
international
XX wieku, której organizatorem
conference.
jest Centrum Badań Kultury
Chava
Żydowskiej
Rosenfarb
Uniwersytetu
and
Łódzkiego,
Jewish
a także
writers
Centrum
of 20th
Dialogu imienia
century.
Marka Edelmana w Łodzi.
We are doing
Naszym
this in
partnerem
cooperation
jest
with
Instytut Tolerancji w Łodzi.
Institute of Tolerance in
Szczególnie
Łódź.
gorąco
I
serdecznie witam
particularly
rodzinę Chavy Rosenfarb,
warmly
profesor Goldie
welcome
Morgentaler,
the
wraz z
family
mężem,
of
syna
Chava,
pisarki doktora Abrahama Morgentalera,
the
wraz z
daughter,
siostrzenicę
the Goldie
Adele, Reinhartz, całą
and
rodziną,
son,
siostrzeńca
Adele
Abrahama
Reinhartz
Reinhartza,
with the entire
Reinhartza.
family,
Przed chwilą w
And
Parku Ocalałych odsłoniliśmy
a
drzewko
moment
pamięci
ago,
dedykowane rodzicom
in
Adele i
the
Abrahama, a
Survivors
także
Park,
drzewko syny
we
Pinczewskiej
have
Rosenfarb, mamy patronki
issued
rodzin.
the certificates
Witam także wszystkich
for
konferencyjnych
trees
gości,
of
którzy
memories.
przybyli
I
z
welcome
7
all
krajów.
the conference
Z Kanady,
guests
Stanów
who
Zjednoczonych,
came from
Włoch,
Canada,
Szwecji,
United
Niemiec,
States,
Ukrainy,
Sweden,
ze
Ukraine,
Szwajcarii, z Polski
Switzerland.
już 8, bo teraz sobie przypomniałam, że jeszcze Szwajcaria, tak? Wszystkie
Yes,
wymienione.
Switzerland, I
Witam
now
Państwa
remember.
bardzo serdecznie.
So,
Niestety z
welcome.
powodu wojny w Izraelu nie dotarli do nas
Because
goście z
of the
Izraela.
war in Israel, we don't
Chciałabym
have
poprosić
delegation
Państwa
coming
o
from
powstanie.
Israel. So now please
I
everybody
symboliczną
rise
minutą
and
ciszy
we will
chcielibyśmy uczcić
commemorate
pamięć
with
ofiar wojny.
1 minute silence all the victims of that war.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Na naszej konferencji szczególnie gorąco witamy
And
także
we also
naszych
warmly
wspaniałych wesołych
welcome
gospodarzy.
the hosts
Witam pana profesora
of the
Łukasza
city.
Boguckiego, prorektora
Welcome to
Uniwersytetu Łódzkiego do spraw
Deputy
współpracy z
Rector of
zagranicą.
Łódź University, Łukasz Bogucki.
Witam panią profesor Joannę Jabłkowską,
Welcome,
dziekan
Joanna
Wydziału Filologicznego
Jabłkowska,
Uniwersytetu
the
Łódzkiego.
Dean of the Languages
I witam
Faculty,
bardzo serdecznie panią wiceprezydent
and
Łodzi, panią
welcome
Małgorzatę
Deputy
Moskwa-Wodnicką, która
Mayor
jest
of
z nami
Łódź,
już.
Małgorzata
I
Moskwa-Wodnicka.
nie wiem, bo nie widziałam, czy jest z nami pan profesor
I
Goldstein.
don't know whether Professor
Ale też go
Goldstein
witam
is with
zaocznie.
us, but anyway,
Pani ambasador
Professor, a warm welcome
Kanady,
to you.
Katarzyna
Ambassador
Godin,
of
niestety nie mogła dziś
Canada,
przyjechać do
Catherine
Łodzi,
Godin,
ale w poniedziałek
unfortunately
zorganizowała
could
uroczystość
be with us
dedykowaną
today,
Chavy Rosenfarb.
but
Przekazuję państwu
she
serdeczne.
is sending her regards.
Witam także wszystkich pozostałych gości
And
konferencji.
welcome to all.
I szanowni państwo, chciałabym
our
bardzo serdecznie
guests.
zaprosić,
And now
poprosić o zabranie
I
głosu
would like to
pana profesora Łukasza
ask on
Boguckiego,
stage
prorektora Uniwersytetu
Professor
Łódzkiego do
Łukasz
spraw współpracy z
Bogucki,
zagranicą. Bardzo
Deputy Rector of University of Łódź, responsible for international cooperation.
Thank you very much. I'll address the floor in English if that's okay. As you know very well, Chava Rosenfarb was born 100 years ago this year in this very city of Łódź, so it's only fitting that the authorities of the city, the University of Łódź and Marek Edelman Dialogue Center should team up to organize this conference in honor of the world-renowned Jewish poet and writer. I would like to welcome the family, all the other participants, as was mentioned before, from as many as 8 countries. In these turbulent times, it is no mean feat to travel across continents and to come here to pay homage to the poet on the 100th anniversary of her birthday. I'd like to thank the organizers, Marek Edelman Dialogue Center, the Faculty of Philology of University of Łódź, and the City of Łódź itself. I will be brief. I do not want to take too long. Once again, I'm very happy to be able to open this conference on behalf of the authorities of the university, and I hope that you have a very pleasant meeting and a very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, proszę o zabranie głosu panią dziekan Wydziału
Now
Filologicznego.
I invite on stage the Dean of Language Faculty.
Szanowni Państwo,
Madam Mayor,
bardzo się
rectors,
cieszę, że
ladies and
mogę
gentlemen,
współotworzyć
I'm
tę
very
konferencję.
happy to open this conference because this has been initiated, among others, by our faculty. So everyone involved in the Jewish studies. And it seems that the conference, which is starting now, had different important reasons. First of all, it was initiated by the works of Chava Rosenfarb, a writer from Łódź. Chava is still discovered in Poland, and her works some of her works have been translated into Polish, and Chava may become a symbol of our city because she represents one of the four cultures of Łódź. And we should also remember that this culture is non-existent in the city. And why the conference is so important? Well, it was organized not mainly, but exclusively by women who, at our faculty, deal with Jewish culture. And it's not just a single chair or one institute. These are researchers of the faculty coming from different departments. Some of them are historians. And this conference is the final stage of their research. The culture in Yiddish has very extensive scientific research. And the fact that this conference, which is now opening, is a very special event for young and older researchers involved in these studies. So this is a culture belonging to the past, but also to the future of this city. Thank you for coming, visiting us from distant locations, and I hope that you will have fruitful discussions here, and that you will also have a chance to see the part of the city which was the part where Chava
Państwa, bardzo
was
serdecznie
living.
zapraszam na scenę panią wiceprezydent Łodzi, panią Małgorzatę Moskwę-Wodnicką, gospodarza miasta.
Wodnicką on behalf of the host of our city.
Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie.
A very warm welcome.
Najbliższej rodzinie Chawy Rosenfarb.
I bow my head before the close family of Chava's family, and I would like to thank director of Edelman Center, also the university, also the Łódź Trail of Women. All these organizations wanted year 2023 to become the year of Chava Rosenfarb. And the City Council unanimously approved this year as the Chava Rosenfarb year. And we wanted to make Chava Rosenfarb more familiar to you and other people. And in the Survivors Park, I said that Chava was one of the
naszego miasta
founders of
i szczególnie
the
jest
city.
ważne, że jesteście
We
Państwo
are
dzisiaj
celebrating
z nami, bo myślę, że
600th
zapisuje się kolejna
anniversary
karta
of the
historii
city.
naszego miasta. Chciałam się
And,
Pani Dyrektor nisko
I
pokłonić
would
za
like
wszystkie
to,
spotkania,
bow
warsztaty,
to
prelekcje, w niektórych
Madam
też udało mi
Director
się
for all the
uczestniczyć,
workshops,
ale
all
również
the
za to, że to właśnie Centrum
meetings,
Dialogu
all the
podjęło się przetłumaczenia książki Chawy
all
Rosenfarb
other events,
i
but
otwiera się
first
tu
of
drugi
all
wątek,
for
dzięki któremu
translating
możemy poznać nie
most
tylko
of the books
twórczość,
by Chava
ale zapoznajemy się z jej
Rosenfarb.
życiem,
But we
rodziną,
not only
biografią,
meet
ale
Chava
również
in
z
her
przemyśleniami,
books or
które
through her
miała
books,
w
but
okrutnym
we
czasie,
also
który nie
learn
tylko
about
ona, ale i
her
inni z rodziny
experiences.
musieli
And
przeżyć. Wiem, że mogliście Państwo
I know
w
that
dniu
you,
wczorajszym
ladies
obejrzeć
and gentlemen, had
miasto,
a
ale też
chance to
odkryć smutny kawałek historii naszego
visit
miasta, obejrzeć
historical
licząc
places
tak
in
getto.
the
Od
city,
tego oczywiście nie uciekniemy,
and we will
ale
not
wszystko to, co
run
dzisiaj
away
robimy,
from
to
that.
jest przede wszystkim
But what we
pamięć.
do
Przede
is
wszystkim
the
to, co jest dla nas
commemoration,
niezwykle ważne, do naszego
especially
miasta, nasze
what
korzenie.
is
A jednym z
particularly
korzeni
important for
to
us,
4
the
kultury,
city,
a jedną z tych
our
kultur jest
roots.
właśnie
The roots
kultura
are
żydowska.
based on
Życzę
4
Państwu przede
cultures,
wszystkim
one of them
wspaniałych obrad,
Jewish culture. I wish you
zapoznawania się z
wonderful
twórczością nie
debate,
tylko Chawy, ale również wszystkich
learning
pisarek, o których
as much
będziecie
as
dyskutować
possible
w czasie
about
konferencji.
the
Nisko się kłaniam wszystkim
works
gościom,
by
którzy
Chava
przyjechali z
Rosenfarb,
zagranicy.
and
Dziękuję
thank
bardzo.
you to all of you who came to Łódź from abroad.
Szanowni Państwo, za chwilkę zaproszę na scenę panią profesor Małgorzatę Domagalską, która jest szefową Centrum Badań Kultury Żydowskiej Uniwersytetu Łódzkiego, która jest organizatorem konferencji, która otworzy naukową część tej konferencji. Ale jeszcze przed tym chcielibyśmy na chwilkę oddać głos bohaterce głównej bohaterce, bo przecież nie tylko Chava Rosenfarb jest bohaterką konferencji, ale też inne żydowskie pisarki Łodzi. Ale to o niej jednak głównie
although
mówimy,
of course
bo to
we'll
jest
be
rok
speaking
Chavy
about
Rosenfarb.
also
Także
about other
zapraszam,
Jewish female
posłuchajmy
writers, but
fragmencik o
Chava
tym, co
Rosenfarb is the main heroine of today's event. So let's give the floor to her.
I started writing as a child, and during the war I wrote a lot. And then, in Europe, and then in Belgium I wrote a lot, but mostly poetry. My first books are volumes of poetry. And my first novel, the big novel about the Lodz Ghetto, it was my first prose book. When I started writing prose, I was in my 20s. When I wrote poetry, my poetry was, I wrote my poetry before that. And I was in my 20s. In my 20s when I started to think about the big novel which I wrote eventually.
This was the Tree of Life novel?
Yeah, the Tree of Life.
What is the title in Yiddish?
Der Boom von Leben. This is the Yiddish title of the book. Yeah.
Now,
and it's a trilogy in 3 volumes, and it concentrates only on life in the Lodz Ghetto. The 4 years of Jewish community's life in the Lodz Ghetto, and all the aspects of that life. And there are 10 characters from all walks of life, on different intellectual levels, and they are the main characters. And through going through their life and following them in the ghetto.
Yiddish writer alive today, is that what they say about you?
Very sad. It's very sad that I should be the greatest Yiddish writer, but because, it's because of the fact that the other great writers died out. So in that way. I don't like to be classified like that.
You're all about this Yiddish revival. Now, what is your reaction? Do you feel that the real revival is possible in Yiddish today?
There is a certain form of revival. People are interested in Yiddish. People try to learn some Yiddish, to teach their children a little bit. There is some revival. Mostly it's klezmer, klez music. For a continuation of Yiddish literature, there's very little hope for the time being, because in order to become a Yiddish writer, you have to be soaked up in the language. You have to be able to use the finest expression to bring out literary terms, literary situations. And this will take a long time. First they have to learn the language, and that's not enough. It's not enough to know the language, technically sort of, the everyday language. You have to get deep into the language in order to be able to create in this language.
Well, what is the particular sensibility that Yiddish offers to a writer? Does it have a special quality that you could identify?
Yeah, Yiddish has its qualities, of course. It's a very pliable language. It's a wise language, and a humorous language, and you can express most intricate sentiments and thoughts. You can express it in Yiddish, find adequate words for it. And Yiddish is very rich. It's a very rich language. It sort of adopted many foreign expressions of foreign languages and assimilated them. And I love writing in Yiddish. However, I am forced now to write in English sometimes. And I have to do it if I want to express myself and be read. I have to write in English.
Szanowni Państwo, i przemówiła do nas Chava Rosenfarb sama. Bardzo dziękuję. Tu jest
Chava's voice.
Autorką tego
Thank
filmu.
you very much.
Cały film Montreal Yiddish będzie do obejrzenia jutro po południu na konferencji na Uniwersytecie Łódzkim. Także bardzo serdecznie. I zapraszam teraz na scenę panią profesor Małgorzatę Domagalską,
the head of the Center for Jewish Studies, and she will chair the scientific part of the conference.
As the chair of the Center for Research in Jewish Culture at the Faculty of Philology at the University of Łódź, I would like to welcome our distinguished guests once again. We are very grateful that you decided to come and join us in this exceptional event. I would like also to thank all the institutions who supported us in the organization of this conference, especially University of Łódź and also Institute of Tolerance and Stanisław Kolstein, who is the head of the institute. Last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude to the people involved in organizing the conference, my wonderful colleagues from the Center for Research in Jewish Culture, Dr. Joanna Podolska, who is also the director of the Marek Edelman Center, and Professor Danuta Scheinert. My special thanks go to a person who you have already known very well, to our wonderful secretary, Dr. Julia Dynkowska, and also Agnieszka Wilczek from Marek Edelman Center for Dialogue. Without their involvement, this project would not be possible. Our conference is devoted to reflection on the work of Chava Rosenfarb and other female Jewish writers of the 20th century, as well as literary genre and various methods of expressions. We will hear different women voices from Holocaust and post-Holocaust generations, discuss the difficulties of translation and the language of non-expression. We will see the documentary Yiddish Montreal and listen to Letter for the Living, written by Chava Rosenfarb and performed by Jen Arnfield. I'm truly convinced that this conference will be an inspiring and important experience for all of us. I would like to wish all of us great conference and fruitful discussions. Thank you. And now I would like to invite to the stage Professor Goldie Morgentaler from Canada, University of Lethbridge, who is the daughter of Chava Rosenfarb. Professor Goldie Morgentaler is Professor Emerita at the University of Lethbridge, where she taught 19th century literature and modern Jewish literature. She translated from Yiddish to English of much of Chava Rosenfarb's work, including her important Holocaust novel, The Tree of Life, a trilogy of life in the Lodz Ghetto, which has also been translated into Polish by the great Polish translators from Yiddish to Polish and published by the Marek Edelman Dialogue Center. Professor Morgentaler English translation have won numerous awards, including 2 for the translation of Rosenfarb's short story collection, which was recently published under the title In the Land of the Postscripts, The Short Stories of Chava Rosenfarb. Professor Goldie Morgentaler will give a speech titled Poland and Translation, and this is keynote of this conference.
It's okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I'm very moved to be here, and I thank you all for coming. I have to begin by saying something about what has been going on in Israel last week. I'm sure you all know what has been going on. In a way, it's as if the past is not staying past, especially for Jews. My mother was a writer of the Holocaust, which was undoubtedly the worst catastrophe for Jews in Jewish history. But it never seems to end. And I guess everything seems to hark back again and again and again. But I don't want to begin on a depressing note. I will switch. I just wanted to say that I think it's impossible not to be aware of what's going on. And also, and the world may be on the verge of war, for all we know, but also in terms of this particular conference. And I'm going to talk more about what happened to my mother during the Holocaust. But on a more cheerful note, I would like to thank Joanna Podolska, I don't see her right now. Oh, there she is, for all her work. My mother would have been overjoyed by this conference, and I'm sure she never expected anything quite like it. That she and her writing would be the focus of a year-long celebration in the city of her birth. It would have seemed so unlikely to her that I don't think it ever occurred to her that it would happen. And much of this is thanks to Joanna, who was talking about translating my mother's work into Polish from the very first time I met her many years ago. And my reaction at the time to this idea was, yeah, right, dream on. I'll believe it when I see it. It seemed like such a pipe dream that I completely forgot that it might actually, it never occurred to me that it might actually happen. And yet, here we are, celebrating Chava's centennial, and with almost all of her works available in Polish translation. And it's all thanks to Joanna. Thank you. So I want to begin by this unusual and wonderful conference by saying a little about the woman who inspired it. My mother, Chava Rosenfarb, from my personal point of view. Next slide. No, go back. No, go back, go back. Okay, that's me. My mother and I used to fight a lot, but mostly we fought about translation. At least that's what I would like you to believe. And these were not genteel disagreements, but passionate, intemperate shouting matches. She would say, "That's not what I meant. You twisted my words. Why can't you just translate what I wrote?" And I would say, "Because it's not English. You cannot say that in English." Or I would complain, "It's too sentimental, too much mush, too many adjectives." She would reply, "What a cold language English is." We fought about her use of words. I would say, "You can't use that word. There is no such word in English." She would say, "Yes, there is," and show me the dictionary. I would say, "Okay, the word exists, but no one will know what you mean." She would say, "I want this word because this is the word that I want. People will understand even if you don't." I'll just give you one example of some of the issues we fought about. So take the word in English, gymnasium, which is pronounced gymnasium, right, in English with a soft G. I would say, "You cannot use this word to mean high school. No one will know what you're talking about. In English, gymnasium means a building or a room that is devoted to athletics." She would say, "High school does not sound right. It's too everyday, it's not warm enough." What she wanted was gymnasium, right? But it's spelled the same in both languages. What I'm talking about, she would say, is the school after primary school, and that is a gymnasium and not a gymnasium. We'll put it in italics so people will know what it means. My mother had a firm belief that if you put a foreign word in italics in English, everybody will know what it meant. And so it went. We wrestled with the meanings of words and which word was le mot juste. As you all know, my mother was the Yiddish writer, Chava Rosenfarb, who died in January 2011, just shy of her 88th birthday. So I tell you about our quarrels, not to suggest that my mother and I had a quarrelsome relationship, although we did, up to a point. Nor did I tell you this. Do I tell you this? Because I want to demonstrate that she and I were a team, although that is exactly what we were, a translating team. I tell you this because I want to emphasize just how important writing was to my mother's life and how much emotion, passion, and energy she devoted to it. She was very prolific, and I admired her very much. She was born in Lodz 100 years ago on February 9th, the elder of two daughters of Abraham Rosenfarb, a restaurant waiter. Her mother worked in a textile factory as a stopperke, which means a mender of faults in fabric. Both of Chava's parents originally came from the small town of Koński, which is located near Krakow. The father's side of the family traced its descent from Reb Yonason Eibushitz, a famous rabbi of 18th century Prague. Chava was very proud of the fact that she descended from a famous rabbi because it gave her yichus, a prestigious descent. But her pride was also tweaked by the fact that Yonason Eibushitz had a strange reputation. On the one hand, he was thought to have been a fierce opponent of the false messiah Shabtai Tzvi. On the other hand, he may also have been secretly a follower. This reputational uncertainty endeared him to my mother, who thought that this was exactly the kind of ambiguity that perfectly suited him to be a forebearer of a writer like herself. Chava's parents both migrated from the town of Koński, or Kinsk in Yiddish, to Lodz to find work in the factories. There they married, and Chava and her younger sister Henya were both born in Lodz. Her father began his working life as a weaver in a factory, but because he was an unusually good-looking man, or so my mother said, he landed a job as a waiter in a restaurant that catered to a Jewish literary and political clientele. And this was his job when Chava, his first child, was born. She later published a fictional account of the early lives and courtship of both her parents in the novels Bochani, Of Lodz and Love, and Letters to Abrasha. Chava's parents were active in the Jewish Socialist Bund, the secular, left-leaning Jewish political movement that had an enormous following among working-class Jews in Eastern Europe. In the period between the two world wars, the Bund was a major cultural and political force in Poland, where it elected representatives to the city council in the larger cities. Bundist ideology encouraged agitation for equal rights for Jews in Poland, where there was rampant anti-Semitism, with restrictions on Jews in higher education and the professions. The Bund also incorporated a strong cultural element that privileged Yiddish as the language of the Jewish masses. So Chava and her sister were educated in Yiddish at a Bundist school. One of the other students at this school was Heinrich Morgentaler, the son of Joseph Morgentaler, a Bundist representative to the city council of Lodz. Chava married Heinrich Morgentaler after the war in Belgium in 1949. When they immigrated to Canada in 1950, he changed his name to Henry and became famous, or infamous, depending on your point of view, in Canada as a crusader for abortion rights. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. To return to Chava, while her elementary school education had been all in Yiddish, her high school education was in Polish, although the school she attended was funded by Jews and its student body was Jewish. She attended this school for 5 years, both before and after the outbreak of the war. By the time she graduated, she was already incarcerated in the Lodz ghetto. While still a child, Chava had shown a talent for writing, producing countless poems which her father proudly showed off to the patrons of the restaurant where he worked. She later claimed that she became a writer on the day when she first learned to hold a pencil in her hand. But she became a Holocaust writer on February 8th, 1940, one day before her 17th birthday, when she, her family, and the entire Jewish population of Lodz were herded into a ghetto. There she wrote, "The nightmare of my early life began in earnest, and it was this nightmare of incarceration in the Lodz ghetto that became the subject of her 3-volume novel, The Tree of Life, a trilogy of life in the Lodz ghetto." The Nazis established the ghetto in 1940, herding the Jews into baluti, or balut in Yiddish, one of the city's slums, which they encircled with barbed wire. Chava's family was housed in a tiny apartment with only a kitchen and a bedroom. She and her sister slept in the kitchen on chairs and a sofa. It was from this bed of chairs that she would rise every morning at dawn to write poems before going to work at her various ghetto jobs. I like this photo because it shows the bridge, and also it's probably taken in the early years of the ghetto because there are so many people crossing. The bridge connected the two sides of the ghetto. Her poetry brought Chava to the attention of Simcha Bunim Shayevich, the great ghetto poet and author of the epic poem Lech Lecho. Shayevich is the good-looking guy at the back, two from the right. Or so my mother said. I may be wrong. She became one of Shayevich's protégés, and it was he who introduced her to the writers group of the Lodz ghetto, who quickly recognized her talent and accepted her at age 17 as their youngest member. When the ghetto was liquidated in August 1944, Chava and her family were deported to Auschwitz. There she was separated from her father, whom she never saw again. From Auschwitz, Chava, her mother and sister, were transported to the forced labor camp at Zazel on the outskirts of Hamburg, where they built houses for the bombed-out Germans of that city. As the Allies approached, Chava, her mother and sister, were again transported, this time to Bergen-Belsen, where they were liberated by the British Army in April 1945. In 1950, she emigrated to Canada and settled in Montreal. Given her experiences during the war, it is not surprising that the Holocaust hovers over Chava's work like a malignant shadow. In fact, the genesis of her most famous novel, The Tree of Life, began at Auschwitz. Here is Chava's description. When we disembarked at Auschwitz, I stood on the station platform with my knapsack on my back, one arm embracing my father. I held a bundle of poems that I had written in the ghetto under one arm. A capo tore the bundle from under my arm and tossed it onto a heap of discarded prayer books, letters, and photographs. The men were separated from the women, and my father was ordered to join the columns of men. That was the last I ever saw of him. Then came the selection. My mother, my sister, and I were sent off through the gate with the inscription, Arbeit macht frei. Soon I stood naked, with my head shaved, but my life spared. It was then that the thought of one day writing a book about the Lodz ghetto, that is, if I survived, flickered for a moment across my mind. That's the end of the quotation. In fact, it was not until Chava was settled in Montreal, immediately after the war, that the real work on the novel began. At the same time, she was writing poetry, and her first published books were 4 collections of poetry in Yiddish. And then the next one. No. She also wrote a play called The Bird of the Ghetto, about the Vilnius ghetto and its hero, the partisan leader Isaac Wittenberg. Feeling, though, that neither poetry nor drama could adequately express everything that she wanted to say about her experiences during the Holocaust, in the early 1950s, Chava began concentrating most of her literary energies on writing the 3-volume novel that became The Tree of Life, which was finally published in Yiddish in 1972. This was followed by Bochani, Lodz and Love, and Letters to Abrasha, all set in Poland, all written in Yiddish. Given that all of Chava's novels are set in Poland, it is fair to wonder what her attitude was towards this country. I think the simplest answer is that she was ambivalent. Some of the Poles whom she describes in her novels are very positive characters, kindly and admirable, like Wanda in The Tree of Life and the washerwoman Manka in Bochani. But there are other Polish characters who are not kind, not tolerant, and often cruel. I suspect this was an accurate reflection of Chava's experience and of Polish-Jewish relations before and during the Second World War. What I find especially moving in Chava's novels is an ambiguous sense of nostalgia for her lost city of Lodz. I say it is ambiguous because while it is full of longing for a world that is gone, it also acknowledges the complicated realities of Jewish life in Poland as she knew them. In her novels, Chava attempted to recreate Lodz as a way to transport herself again back to the land of her childhood and youth. Thus, the very first line of the English translation of The Tree of Life is a bald statement of place. And it's a quote, "Samuel Zuckerman was born in Lodz," period. As if nothing else we are going to learn about Samuel Zuckerman is as important as his place of birth. The rest of that opening paragraph goes on to tell us that not only was Samuel himself born in Lodz, but so was his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather, who had been among the first Jews to leave the ghetto and settle downtown. There follows a description of Zuckerman's ancestors and their civic contributions to the city of Lodz. For instance, Samuel's great-grandfather had laid the foundations for the Jewish cotton trade and textile industry, and in the year 1836 had moved into a massive brick house at number 17 on Nowomiejska Street, where Samuel still lives. Samuel himself intends to write a history of Lodz, a city for which he feels a sense of ownership and pride. He considers himself to be both a proud Polish patriot and an ardent Zionist. That these two things may be contradictory and irreconcilable does not occur to him. From the beginning, the city of Lodz is established as a character in the Tree of Life. Place names are constantly invoked: Piotrkowska, Lutomierska, Narutowicz, Ogodowa. The first 6 paragraphs of the second chapter are devoted to a lovingly detailed description of Lutomierska Street, the main street in the Jewish slum of Baluti, which would become the location of the Lodz ghetto when the Nazis took over the city. Were the subject matter not so tragic, one might be tempted to call the Tree of Life a love offering to this shabby beauty of a city, as Chava once called Lodz. But Chava's Lodz is the Jewish Lodz, as in Yiddish, Lodz, and not the Polish Łódź, the Lodz in which she grew up. In fact, one of the things this novel attempts to do is to reestablish the Jews at the center of a novel about a city divided between three indigenous populations, the Polish, the German, and the Jewish. When I was a child and my mother tried to tell me her memories of Lodz, I did not want to listen, and she tried quite often. Lodz and Poland were too far removed from my daily reality as a young person growing up in the Canadian city of Montreal. A city which, I might add, is also divided between two large ethnic communities, ethnic and linguistic communities, and that has also witnessed a mass exodus of Jews in the 1970s, and for which I too feel an ambiguous nostalgia. It was many years before I allowed my mother to cajole me into working with her on the translations of her works from Yiddish to English. I was reluctant for a number of reasons, not least the fact that I was afraid of the subject of the Holocaust. I felt that I knew too much about it, and I preferred to let the horrors of the past stay in the past. But the experience of working with my mother on the translation of the Tree of Life changed my relationship to her. No longer was she just my mother. In those many months that we worked together on the translation, we became more than simply mother and daughter. We became partners and collaborators in a great literary enterprise, and she became one of my most admired writers. As I've said, most of Chava's literary works deal with the Holocaust in Poland and with its after effects on the lives of survivors in North America. But at the same time, her work transcends the Holocaust. Yes, Chava was a Holocaust survivor, and this was a major theme in her writing. But this great tragedy did not define her for all time. It was not the essence of her life. When asked what she did for a living, she always replied, "I am a writer." And she bristled if anyone implied that she did not leave her house, that because she did not leave her house and go to work every day, she had no job. Writing was her job. More than that, writing was her life. She was never more miserable than when she had a writer's block, and never happier than when she had a great idea for a story. When she was elderly and could not write much anymore, she would shake her head and say with regret, "I was happiest when I was writing." But writing is a lonely business, and it was especially lonely for someone writing in Yiddish. When The Tree of Life was first published in 1972, she received letters from readers from all over the world and glowing reviews in the Yiddish press that acclaimed it as one of the superior literary depictions of the Holocaust. But she could not convince a single English language publisher to take a chance on publishing the novel until the year 2000. In the wider world, that is, the English-speaking world, she was an unknown, merely another obscure housewife who thought she could write. As she put it in her essay, Confessions of a Yiddish Writer. If writing is a lonely profession, then the Yiddish writer's loneliness has an added dimension. Her readership has perished, her language has gone up with the smoke of the crematoria. She creates in a vacuum, almost without a readership, out of fidelity to a vanished language, as if to prove that Nazism did not extinguish its last breath, that it is still alive. She felt, she said, like an anachronism, wandering across a page of history. So, like most Yiddish writers, she needed a translator. And so she gave birth to one. She gave birth to me. We began collaborating on translations of her works when I was 14 years old, and we never really stopped. Sometimes she did most of the work and I was merely an editor, as happened with her novels Bocciani and Of Lodz and Love. Sometimes I did most of the work. This has been especially true of the books published after her death, the short stories in the newly published collection called In the Land of the Postscript, the essays in her essay collection, Confessions of a Yiddish Writer, and in Letters to Abrasha, her last novel, on which I am still at work and which will probably appear in Polish before it is published in English, at the rate I'm going. But while Chava was alive, we worked together and fought about words and meanings and transmutations of sentences. Literature was all in all for my mother. When she was not writing it, she was reading it. She read novels and books of poetry. She read in Yiddish, in English, in French, in Polish, and in German. Her favorite nonfiction reading were the biographies of other writers. Chava loved her children, she loved her garden, she loved flowers and magnificent landscapes like the open skies of the Canadian prairies where she spent her last years. But it was in the literary world that she found her true joy, her sense of purpose, her redemption from suffering and terrible memories, because it was only while writing about the Holocaust that she could come to terms with it. And the same was true for the tragedy of her failed marriage. My mother, Chava, was sensitive to a fault, but she had the warmest heart and the sharpest mind. She believed in the value of the everyday, in the holiness of mundane things, because she had lived too much in terrible times. And she believed in the value of art as the highest of all human accomplishments. She was an idealist and she was a cynic at the same time. She had desperately wanted a happy, sedate family life without tension or betrayal or cruelty. She did not get it. As you may imagine, I have many memories of my mother. Some of the sweetest are very ordinary, such as shopping trips we took together, or going for walks with my dog, or her wonderful chicken soup, the only thing she ever did that conformed to the stereotype of the Jewish mother. But my favorite memory is of the sight of my mother sitting at her desk, so immersed in what she was writing that she did not hear what was said to her. When I saw her there, with her beautiful hazel eyes fixed dreamily in the distance, or more accurately, fixed on the inner landscape of her imagination, I knew that all was well with the world and that life was good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Morgentaler. And now I would like to invite Professor Adele Reinhartz from Canada, and Professor Reinhartz give her speech titled Chanele's Diary or Henia's Memoir, a mystery document from or about the Lodz Ghetto. Professor Adele Reinhartz is distinguished university professor at the University of Ottawa, where she teaches in the Department of Classics and Religious Studies. Her main research contributions have been in the study of ancient Jewish-Christian relations and in the study of Bible and film. She has authored or edited close to 20 books, recently Bible and Cinema, an introduction. Professor Reinhartz has been a member of the Israel Institute for Advanced Studies and the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. She has also been a visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, Boston College, and Rome. In 2021, Professor Reinhartz was awarded the Konrad Adenauer Research Prize, given to one Canadian researcher annually by the Humboldt Foundation in Germany. Currently, she is preparing translations and editions of recently discovered Yiddish documents written by her mother, a survivor of the Lodz Ghetto in the years 1945-51. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I too want to express my gratitude, that's not even a strong enough term, to Joanna Podolska and to everyone else who has made this event possible, the conference and all the events surrounding. It's an extremely meaningful time for our family, even more than I could have anticipated. And it's also meaningful that it's taking place in the shadow of two events, one of the terrible events happening in Israel right now, and the other is the Polish election of Sunday. It feels really very special to be here at this moment. So my talk is entitled, as you can see, Chanele's Diary or Henya's Memoir, a mystery document from or about the Lodz Ghetto. So my mother is Chava Rosenfarb, her married name Henya Reinhartz, and she was Chava's sister, as I think you all know. You've seen a picture of her in Goldie's presentation as a 5 or 6 month old baby. The sisters were very close. There you see them in middle age, and this is really how I always picture them. Very close in every way. And our families also were very close. Even as a child, I was struck by how similar the sisters were, at least from a child's perspective. Not only did they look and speak in similar ways, but Chava's warmth and love had the same texture as my mother's, and we spent many of our holidays together as families. The sisters were similar in their interests and their commitments as well. They were both members of the SCIF, the youth branch of the Jewish Labor Bund, as they were growing up. They went to the Medem Shul for elementary school. And many of their parents and many friends were also active in the Bund. And they were both committed to Yiddish language and literature. As we all know, Chava devoted herself to writing evocative poetry, novels, and essays, whereas Henya had a long and successful career as a teacher of Yiddish and a sought-after lecturer. Henya, too, however, was a writer, though in her case, writing was an avocation rather than vocation. Until a couple of years ago, I was aware only of the stories and essays that Henya wrote as a mature student at York University in Toronto. But in clearing out her apartment after her death in 2021, I found a treasure trove of Yiddish documents. These documents dated from shortly after her liberation from Bergen-Belsen in 1945 to her departure from Paris to Canada in 1951. Among them were clippings of columns that she had published in the Brussels Yiddish newspaper in the immediate post-war years, as well as isolated pages from journals that she kept in Brussels and Paris. For reasons unknown, our mother had never shown these papers to my brother and me. Perhaps in the flurry of a busy life, She forgot that she even had them. And yet, there they were. Most intriguing was a lengthy text, handwritten in a neat Yiddish script, my mother's script I could recognize, in a yellow and brittle school notebook of some 70 pages. This text takes the form of a diary set in the Lodz ghetto, with entries dating from May 4th, 1940 to August 24th, 1944. It records the thoughts and feelings of a teenage girl. The first 20 pages or so focus on the girl's family and her day-to-day experiences and emotions as she adjusts to the routine horrors of ghetto life. The remaining 50 pages focus primarily on the girl's friendship with another teenager named Rivka, and it includes references to the activities of the SCIF and the Jewish Labor Bund, the Sperre, and many other events. I was very excited by this discovery. My mother had occasionally mentioned that she and most of her friends had kept a diary in the ghetto, but my mother had lost it during the deportation to Auschwitz in August 1944. Yet here it was, or so I thought. A bit more digging, however, brought to light a second version of the document. There you can see, this is the title page of this second version. So the title page, I don't have a light here, do I? This is the light? Okay. So here, here you see my mother's name, Chava Rosenfarb, and here you see the name of the document, Chanele's Togbuch, which means Chanele's diary. The title page, as you can see here you see here a dedication to the luminous memory of Chanele Heuser, born in Lodz on the 28th of March, 1926, who perished during the evacuation of the Stutthof concentration camp a few hours before liberation. So that's the translation of the dedication. Now, I had heard about Chanele over the years, but I really only knew two things about her. One was that she was Henya's best friend during the ghetto years, and the other was that she had not survived. The mystery was now cleared up, sort of. The diary was not my mother's, but Chanele Heuser's. But then I wondered, how did Henya get hold of Chanele's diary? Now, Henya provides an answer on the diary's first page. I'm quoting now. I already knew that Chanele had not survived. I already knew that death had met her at dawn, and that her soul had trembled with the joy she had so longed for in the nightmare years of barbed wire. I knew that I would look for her in vain among the hundreds of people who had come from there. That is why my first post-war steps were towards the house in which we had together dreamt the ghetto dream. I hoped to find a sign, a trace of her, and I did indeed find it. Deep in the cellar of the ghetto house were buried a few orphaned pages of a notebook, pages from Chanele's diary. They are now lying on my desk, straightened out, cleaned up, but orphaned. Tear-stained, they stare at me with Chanele's dear, familiar eyes. That's the first page of the diary. In the postscript at the very end, Henya repeats this story, and she identifies herself as Chanele's friend Rivka, who figures so prominently on the pages of Chanele's diary. Henya then signs and dates the transcription to July 1947 and names the place as Brussels. Whoops. So this is the last page. So you can see here, this is what interested me. So this is what I just read, that she had found the diary. She just repeats that same story. And here again, she signs it. Here is Brussels, July 1947. So my mother was 19 years old at the time. Now, I really wanted to believe this story, but I knew that it wasn't true, and here the mystery begins. Henia could not have found Chanele's diary because she did not return to Poland after the war. I knew this for a fact, I even checked with Goldie as well, based not only what my mother had told us, but also on her recorded testimony and on the official papers in my possession that document her movements in the post-war period. In fact, Henia did not return to Poland until a memorable trip that our family took came here 20 years ago in 2003. Had I known about the diary during my mother's lifetime, I would have asked her many, many questions, and she could easily have answered them. But finding the diary after her death meant that I had to find out what answers I could by myself and engage in speculation about the many matters to which no clear answers are available. The most pressing of these concerns is authorship. If Chanele did not compose the diary, then who did? The only answer that makes sense is that it was Henia herself who created this diary in her friend's name. I speculate that the date noted at the end of the diary, July 1947, was not the date of her transcription of these pages, as she says, but the date that she completed the second good draft of the diary. And here she is at about that time. There. Young, beautiful young woman, now safely in Brussels after a period of time in the Feldafing displaced persons camp. Henia was still and understandably preoccupied with her ghetto and concentration camp experiences. And if I'm right that she's the one who wrote it, Chanele's diary is not Chanele's at all, but rather Henia's diary, or more precisely, a memoir of friendship written in the form of a pseudepigraphic diary, a diary written in someone else's name. At the same time, I want to emphasize that none of the people mentioned in the diary is fictional. They all existed, and many of them can be documented from sources that are available to us. And I'll just show you this. This is the housing record, and the part that I've outlined mentions the names of Chanele and her family. You see that Chane's name is second from the bottom. Then we have her sister Perla, younger sister, quite a bit younger. Her older brother Mordecai, but referred to as Motel in the diary. And then I can't quite read the other names, but the top name is her father, and the next one is her aunt. Her mother had died when Chanele was 5. And the aunt kind of moved in to take care of the family. And so it lists their house with the German name, Inselstrasse, I think number 7. And actually yesterday, those of us that went on the walk in the ghetto were able to see this house. So whether Chanele said or wrote the things that are attributed to her in the diary, she herself, her brother Motel, her sister Paula, and all the other people who are named were real people and not fictional characters. That's it. Okay. Holocaust scholars tend to distinguish sharply between diaries and memoirs, arguing that diaries, written during or only slightly after the events they recount, offer more accurate perceptions than do memoirs, which are filtered through the author's subsequent experiences. Today I will argue that when it comes to Chanele's diary, this document, the question of authenticity is not so clear-cut, for 2 reasons. First, the document, though written retrospectively, exhibits traits common to Holocaust diaries. And second, the pseudepigraphic nature of the diary, which is unique to my knowledge among Holocaust diaries currently known to us, complicates and calls into question the very meaning of authenticity when it comes to Holocaust experiences. As I've already mentioned, the fact that Henia did not return to Poland after the war makes it inconceivable that Chanele's diary was in fact Chanele's. Were it not for this fact, however, I would have found it easy to believe that my mother was indeed transcribing the tear-stained pages that she had uncovered. The diary is vivid and immediate. The dates and events it includes can be documented from other sources. It has few, if any, telltale signs of a post-war composition. For example, it doesn't include information that could only have been known after the war. In addition to these points, the diary shares the characteristics of other diaries that were indeed composed in the ghettos. These are described by Batsheva Ben Amos in her essay on Holocaust diaries, published in a 2020 volume called The Diary, The Epic of Everyday Life. In this essay, Ben Amos notes that, quote, people often start to write diaries when an imbalance occurs in their lives between a previously coherent social situation with clear social norms and a new normless situation, end quote. Chanele's diary opens with the narrator's reflections on precisely this point, and I'll just clarify right now that I will be referring to Chanele and Rivka as characters in the diary and to Henya as the author. So when I'm quoting Chanele, I'm not implying that she's the author, but rather that she's the narrator of this work. So here's how Chanele's diary begins. Before I entered the ghetto, I did not understand why my friends kept diaries. What was the point? But now it is a completely different story, and now I understand. When the war broke out, I didn't at all understand what was going on, but the desire to keep a diary was kindled then, when I felt that the normal course of days was changing. So many new muddled thoughts began to torment me, and I had no one to share them with, no one to ask. From the time the ghetto was announced, Motel, Chanele's older brother, is almost never home, and Motel is the only one I could have talked to. Our father wanders anxiously around the house, and I don't have the courage to ask him anything. I don't have any friends. All my school friends have moved away. So I decided to write. I will talk things over with myself, get things off my chest, and maybe the burden will ease, end quote. As Ben Amos notes, however, Holocaust diarists wrote not only to unburden themselves, but also to fulfill other goals, to bear witness, to sound an alarm to the world, to seek future revenge, or to leave traces of their existence. Of these four goals, two can be documented from Chanele's diary: the desire to bear witness and the desire to leave traces of their existence. Like other Holocaust diarists, Chanele is acutely aware of the historic importance of the events that she's experiencing. In the same passage I have just quoted, Chanele writes, quote, "What we Jews are experiencing is a chapter in history. In the future, children will learn about this chapter in school, just as I learned the history of the French Revolution. Perhaps children will someday learn about every date that my hand will inscribe in this notebook," end of quote. There is ample evidence, including the meticulous conservation of documents and ephemera, as well as the recording of events, to suggest that the ghetto's inhabitants themselves were highly aware of the historic importance of what they were enduring. In the diary's early pages, Chanele describes her writing as secretive. She says, "I write when everyone is sleeping, because then it is calm, no one is nosing around, and no one asks, why is she writing so much? I don't want anyone to know about my diary. I am embarrassed and afraid that they will make fun of me," end quote. By the end, however, Chanele, the narrator, can imagine other people, perhaps including those who did not go through these experiences, as reading her diary. In the final entry, dated August 24th, 1944, Chanele speaks to her diary. She knows that she's going to be she's going to be leaving the ghetto the next day. And she says, "And you, my diary, will stay here. You belong to the ghetto. Maybe I will someday be able to hold you in my hands. And maybe every dear name that will already be on a grave somewhere. If I will not come, maybe someone else's hands will dig you up. It is surely not long until that day. And maybe then we will smile as we read these scribbled pages. Maybe a young person will find it and understand, take you in his pocket, and that way I will always stay in you. It is hard for me to put the pen away and close the notebook, to close the Ghetto chapter. But I don't have anything else to write. I feel an emptiness inside. I know one thing. I want to live. I want so much to live. But tomorrow we are going away. To where? End of quote. Throughout the diary, Chanele expresses her feelings about being in the ghetto and also describes the events of her daily life. At a certain point, she meets a girl named Rivka. They had gone to the same school, the Medem school, but they didn't know each other because they lived at the time in different neighborhoods within Lodz. She also talks about her boyfriend, Shloime, whom she gets to know in the ghetto. And she includes events that occurred in the ghetto itself. She writes about the speeches of Chaim Rumkowski and Hans Bibov. She describes the children's protest march, the opening and closing of schools, the Sperre, and numerous other events. And in this sense, the diary bears witness to the broader situation of ghetto inhabitants. Whether the narrator Chanele or the author Henya intended to share the diary with the world, or even with just a few others, is an open question. Although Chanele expresses the hope that she, and if not she, then at least her diary would survive the war, she does not express any intention to make her diary more widely known, or to use it as a vehicle for educating others about what life was like in the Lodz ghetto. It is likely, however, that Chanele shared her diary with at least one other person, her best friend Henya, aka Rivka. Another adolescent Lodz diarist, Rivka Lipschitz, tells us that in the ghetto, girls regularly read each other's diaries, and I can well believe that Chanele and Henya did the same. This would account for the many details of life in the Heuser household that are especially prominent in the first section of the diary. But beyond that, it is hard to speculate. Whether the diary's author, Henya, intended Chanele's diary to be read by others is also a difficult question to answer. If the diary was written in 1947, as I believe, then Chanele already knows that children are learning about this ghetto chapter in school, as Chanele had foretold in the first diary entry. Indeed, in Brussels, Henya herself taught at a Jewish school, where she no doubt taught her charges about the events that she had experienced. Although, to my knowledge, no diaries, not even the diary of Anne Frank, were as yet published at the time that Henya wrote this document, I suspect that there was already a widespread sense that first-person diaries, such as the ones kept by many ghetto inhabitants, would be invaluable sources for conveying the texture of ghetto life to other people. It is therefore possible that in writing this diary, Henya hoped that others, including those who did not experience the terrors of the ghetto, might read it and thereby understand more fully the lives of those who did. I have no concrete evidence for this intuition or for this intention, and perhaps the fact that Henya did not reveal the existence of this document to her family or to anybody argues against it. Nevertheless, the fact that she went to the trouble of writing a rough copy and then a good copy suggests that being a published columnist already at the age of 18, she may at the age of 20, she may at one time have thought about having it published. I turn now much more briefly to the second motivation of Holocaust diarists as described by Batsheva Ben Amos, the desire to leave traces of their existence. This desire in itself is realistic. Even the youngest ghetto diarists were only too aware of the fragility of their own lives amidst the frequent deportations, the ever-present threat of disease, and the extreme starvation and deprivation of their daily lives. Like the narrator of Chanele's diary, they hoped to survive. But as witnesses to the daily deaths of young and old, they knew that they might not. If they wrote diaries, however, at least their accounts of their experiences and their feelings had a chance of surviving. As we've already seen, in her final entry in the diary on the eve of her deportation, Chanele, as channeled by Henya, hoped to survive and to reconnect with her diary after the war. And if that was not possible, she wanted the diary to be found by someone else who would carry it, and therefore her, in their pocket. In her epilogue, Henya claims to be that person. She writes, as if to Chanele, quote, "Your diary was not found by any stranger's hands. It was Rivka's hands that dug them out. The new day is already springing, Chanele, but not the way that we imagined. The few of us young people who survived are still weeping," end of quote. I believe the diary is the form that my mother's weeping took. In his book entitled Trauma in the First Person, Diary Writing During the Holocaust, Amos Goldberg argues that the Holocaust not only traumatized, but also shattered personal identity, included in which is hope for a future beyond the nightmare itself. Diary writing may have helped to cope with the helplessness by ascribing personal and collective meaning to events of meaningless violence. This may have been true especially of children's diaries and memoirs. Diaries were an outlet for children to express helplessness, rage, fear, and sorrow, without the dire repercussions that overt expressions of anti-Nazi rage might have had. Goldberg argues that diary writing was a doomed attempt to reconstitute those identities, doomed because of the uncertainty of survival and the reality of death that pervaded every day and every hour. By writing the diary in Chanele's name, Henya was doing what she could to keep Chanele alive, or, as Beramos puts it, to ensure that the traces of Chanele's life would not disappear. This very desire, however, was both an expression of Henya's grief at losing her friend and a way of coping with her own traumatic experiences. In one sense, the attempt to preserve the traces of Chanele's life was indeed doomed, as Goldberg suggests, because not a single soul had set eyes on Chanele's diary from 1947 until I came across it in 2021. I hope to redeem this attempt by publishing the diary in English translation with notes and commentary. As for coping with trauma, for Henya it was a lifelong effort. On the back burner during the busy years during which she was raising her family and building her career, and resurfacing in her later years once her family was grown and her career at an end. In its role as a witness to history and as testimony to Chanele's own existence, the document called Chanele's Diary resembles first-person diaries that can be reliably traced to the Lodz Ghetto. But because it was written by someone other than Chanele after the end of the war, Chanele's diary actually sits between two genres. It is a memoir in the sense that it was written retrospectively, but it is a diary in its structure and in the vividness of its entries. Its pseudepigraphic nature complicates matters even further. So why write a memoir in diary form? Diary writing, as I've already mentioned, was near ubiquitous in the ghettos of Nazi Europe. Emanuel Ringelblum, a major figure in the Warsaw Ghetto, killed in 1944, commented that, quote, "In this war, everybody wrote and everybody kept diaries," end quote. This point is emphasized by Batsheva Ben Amos, who writes that, quote, "Diarists were of all ages and all walks of life, with most coming from socio-cultural backgrounds in which writing was valued," end quote. In her Holocaust testimony, as I've already mentioned, Henya notes that she herself kept a diary that she lost before arriving in Auschwitz. The ubiquity of diary keeping makes Henya's decision to structure her memories of Chanele in diary form more understandable. Chanele's diary therefore falls into a category that Alexander Zapruder calls material at the margins. Zapruder critiques the tendency to draw a sharp division between diary and memoir. On the contrary, she argues, the boundaries between these two genres are often blurred. Some Holocaust diarists, including Anne Frank, reworked their diaries, adding, rearranging, and revising material, perhaps in some cases to ensure their publication. Sometimes diaries that were lost were later rewritten, based in part upon memory and in part upon literary recreation. This was the case with diarists Anna Novak and Masha Rolnikai, who constructed their lost diaries from memory. Zapruder notes that, quote, in reality, it was difficult to keep a diary and easy to lose one. The fact that people kept rough notes and added to them after the war is not surprising, since it reflects a continuation of that impulse to write that gave rise to the diary in the first place, end quote. This is not to say that diaries composed or recreated after the fact are exactly the same as those written during the Holocaust and found later. But as Zapruder emphasizes, the sense that such writings are less authentic than diaries marginalizes these post-war writings, which are different but nevertheless valuable records of the writer's experience. Whether memoir or diary or both, Chanele's diary is a vivid and moving account of what life was like in the Lodz Ghetto for teenage girls, and of the powerful role that friendship played in the ability of these girls to cope on a daily basis and to maintain their hopes and dreams for a future, even if, for many, including Chanele, those hopes and dreams would never be fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Reinhartz. Now I would like to invite Mordecai Walfish, who is a writer and non-profit professional based in Brooklyn, New York. As the grandson of Henia Reinhartz and the great-nephew of Chava Rosenfarb, he has a long-time fascination with Yiddish literature and his family's place therein. Mordecai Walfish graduated from King's College in Halifax, and he holds master's degree in comparative literature from Northwestern University in the USA. And he will give a lecture, I Was Never a Sunday Scribbler, the place of writing in the life of Chava Rosenfarb and her sister, Henia Reinhartz.
Thank you. Thank you again to Joanna and everyone for being here. I can't recall a time when I didn't know that my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. My Baba Henia, Chava Rosenfarb's younger sister, spoke often about her experiences during the war, always with a clear moral imperative. You need to know that this happened to me, and you must ensure that something like this never happens again. I was extremely close to my Baba, and the more I understood what happened to her, the more I would look at her with incredulity. How on earth did you, someone who I love so much, who gives me the biggest hugs and takes me to the movies, survive those horrors? And how do you speak of it so matter-of-factly? Growing up, I was obsessed with the Holocaust, and I felt like there was something special about me, that I was associated not just with survivors, but with the storytelling type of survivor who needed to talk about it, to transmit her experience, to teach the world a lesson. I would bring my Baba to speak to my school every chance that I got, and I would beam proudly as she read her carefully woven words, a story of pain, hope, and survival. I always knew that Baba had an older sister named Chava who was a writer, but I was about 10 when I started to understand the significance of what it meant to be related to the luminary Chava Rosenfarb. How does it go? It's the bottom one. Bottom one? I always need my mom's help. Okay, this is the photo. I remember it well. Sitting near the front of a lecture hall at the University of Toronto, that's me in that ugly sweater up front, where Chava was the keynote speaker for an exhibition curated by my father called Yiddish Panorama. I was mesmerized both by the crafted beauty of Chava's language and the commanding power of her presence. There was an exacting quality to her delivery, each word laden with precise meaning. She carried herself with a kind of regal power, and I remember being amazed once again by the fact that we were related and the fact that she had been through something that to me felt so unbelievable. I tried hard to imagine it, to put myself in Chava and Henya's shoes. It's the thing that I wanted and feared the most, to understand what they had been through. This is how I experienced all the Holocaust survivors in my life around whom I was blessed to grow up. A simultaneous closeness and distance. This is me at my sister's bat mitzvah, holding my Baba's hand with all their Holocaust survivor friends who really kind of enveloped us as a bit of a chosen family while we were growing up. Both Chava and Baba, in their lives and in their writing, grappled with the same paradox: how to live in the present while remaining faithful to what was and those who were lost. How to engage in the impossible yet necessary task of transmitting what they experienced to their children and to the world. And how to share their burden with us without asking that we shoulder it ourselves. Something that I've come to appreciate about the writings of both Chava and my Baba is that they are hyper-attuned to this very tension, what it means to translate an experience that is inherently untranslatable to those they love the most and to the world around them. The talk by Chava that I attended as a child was a version of her now famous essay, Confessions of a Yiddish Writer, where she stated, "I was never a Sunday scribbler. Writing was never a hobby for me, a pastime to while away the hours. On the contrary, it was as necessary to me as life itself." Baba, on the other hand, was precisely a Sunday scribbler. Though she was a teacher by profession and by identity, it does seem she was always writing in some way, as you just heard from my mom. After Baba passed away 2 years ago, I found a letter she had written to her writing teacher. In it, she grieves for what she feels is her dissipating creative impulse. She writes, "Some time ago, while spring cleaning, I came upon things I have written years ago during my Paris period. I immersed myself in those pieces, feeling sad, bewildered, and guilty as I went on. I could hardly believe it was me who could express in words ideas, impressions, and feelings perceived at that time. A question started to nag me. What happened? Have I lost the ability to penetrate into things, to observe, to feel even? I realize also I have lost the ability to use words and manipulate them in my native tongue. As a result, I felt guilty for becoming a villain, a murderer of a creative ability I felt I once had. What a title for a confession story, how I killed my own creativity, and I would be punished for it in a terrible way." Despite the fact that she was consistently writing, she resisted being called a writer. In another letter to her teacher, she writes, "I wish I could say about myself I am a writer. I know I have a certain sensitivity and feeling for words. I'm easily stimulated by people like you and by the creativity of a group such as our circle was. But a creative person cannot depend solely on stimulation from outside. The main source of stimulation and inspiration must come from within. There must be this constant urge and drive to write, to paint, to sculpt, or whatever. One must eat and breathe and suffer and be happy with this desire to create ever present within. One's eyes must be on the lookout for faces, expressions, shapes, and colors. One's ears must be open to voices, tunes, modulations. One's mind must be able to dig into one's own experiences and let those faces and voices filter through as to those that they will emerge in a certain oneness. I don't seem to have this capacity, this creative force. At the end of a working day, it is, after all, so much easier to curl up in the corner of a sofa and read or chatter with a friend." Chava was quite the opposite. As you heard from Goldie, she had this urgent, constant urge to write, and she was a prolific writer. And yet, because of what Chava experienced in the Holocaust, her relationship with writing was not one of unencumbered creativity. It was burdened by responsibility to tell that particular story. She both felt and resisted this burden in every fiber of her being. She writes, "I have many times tried to escape the subject of the Holocaust in my writing, but I've never succeeded. No matter which road I take, it invariably leads me back to the destination I most want to avoid." Chava described writing about the Holocaust using the language of fear. Fear of plunging into the abyss of terror, fear to approach the world she had lost, fear of losing touch with her present life, and fear of not doing justice to the subject at hand. And yet, it was as if she had no choice. The ghetto world lived on within me, she said, demanding I give it life. I could only free myself of that demand by recreating the world that I had known as it filtered through the prism of my awareness. This tension between her creative impulse and the weight of obligation to tell her story is shaped further by her experience as a post-Holocaust Yiddish writer. And this quote again that Goldie shared earlier, "If writing is a lonely profession, the Yiddish writer's loneliness has an additional dimension. Her readership has perished. Her language has gone up with the smoke of the crematoria." The pain of not being seen or understood courses through Chava's writings, not just because she wrote in Yiddish, but also because of the chasm that she experienced between Holocaust survivors and those who did not live through the horrors of the Holocaust. While she was a beloved figure during the heyday of the post-war Montreal Yiddish cultural scene, many of her stories and musings speak directly about the gulf she felt that separated her from her peers in Montreal. She writes, "We crave the opportunity to tell at least some of these stories, but no one is willing to listen. We live in two realities, one that is past seeming more real, more palpable than the actual one." My Baba also yearned for an audience. In her writing, there is a persistent thread of not being fully seen, heard, or understood by her fellow Canadians, especially those who had not experienced the Holocaust. She sent her stories off to multiple publications, but was never successful in getting any published. Yet Baba was sometimes able to use writing as a way to bridge gaps, to build community with other people in her writing class, and to find comfort in the language of English and her place in Canada, as well as to process her past. And interestingly, despite being a teacher and lover of Yiddish, she tended to write in English as a way to assert herself in her new home of Canada. I think she believes she found her ultimate audience in us, her grandchildren. When I was 10 years old, toward the ends of one of our classic ritual birthday meals at Baba and Zaida's, Baba presented her 6 grandkids with bits and pieces, the story of her life before, during, and after the war. With Zaida's help, she had published it with spiral binding and presented it to each of us as a gift. I had no idea she was working on it, but I was thrilled. Listening to Baba's stories was my favorite thing to do growing up, and I loved how open and honest she was about both the pain and joy that marked her life. I would ask her endless questions, and she would patiently respond in her gentle, soft Baba way, a beautiful mix of teacher and grandmother. And now I had these words on paper. They were mine to hold and to keep. The epigraph to the memoir reads, "These are bits and pieces of my life. They are for you, my little children, my grandchildren. Perhaps when you read this, you will not be little anymore, but for me, you will always remain my little children." I did not wait until I was older to read it. This became my sacred text, and I devoured it again and again and again. But I remember being confused about the title. Why bits and pieces? Why not the whole thing? I want the full story. Though Baba was incredibly generous and always answering questions and sharing her stories and perspectives with me, she was also an extremely careful curator. When it came to her experiences during the Holocaust, she shared just enough for us to peer into that great horror, but not so much that we might fall in. While she is honest about having experienced great terror, she doesn't touch these terrors directly to protect both herself and her progeny. About her experiences in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen in particular, she writes, "I was in those camps. They are black holes in my memory, places into which I do not like to descend. I'm afraid of the horrors hidden there, always ready to jump at me and rob me of peace and contentment." Here she gestures at the horror and its impact on her without opening up the black holes in her memory. Writing here is a bridge over the abyss that Baba and her readers, her grandchildren, can travel together. Though her intention was only to share this memoir with her family, eventually she was coaxed to release it more broadly, and in 2008 it was published by the Azrieli Foundation as part of its first installment of the Holocaust Survivors Memoir Program. As the galleys came in, Baba was in the early stages of dementia, and we worked together to edit and finalize this memoir to ensure that it was in her voice, accurate and aligned with what she wanted to share with the wider world. I relied on her prior transmission to me in order to be her conduit. The memoir went on to win the Canadian Jewish Book Award in Holocaust Memoir and Literature and found its way into school curriculums around the country. It has become known as a Holocaust memoir that is also accessible to children, and she spent the last years of her life reading and rereading letters that she received from school children around the country, thanking her for her story. Though Chava's prolific works were clearly drawn from her life and the people and places who shaped it, it was only towards the end of her life that she attempts to give a straightforward account of her life. In her unpublished biography, Chava describes her initial resistance to writing anything directly personal, but she shared that after a while, I came to the conclusion that I owe it to her, Goldie, as well as to you, Bamie, to straightforwardly give you the outlines of my life, which belongs to no one else but the two of you. I wish it to become a link between your personal histories and our family's history, which has been in danger of becoming totally annihilated. At the heart of both Chava and Baba's work was a question: to whom do these stories belong? To Chava, her children and her works of art were in a sense intertwined. She famously refers to herself as doubly pregnant when she came to Canada, with her novel and with her daughter Goldie, as she worked towards bringing both into the world. And as you well know, later she quite mobilizes her own flesh and blood towards her writing project when Goldie began translating her works from Yiddish to English. And Chava marveled at Goldie, envying her daughter's grasp of English and the ability to move between languages and worlds in a way that she, Chava, felt that she could not. The gulf between Chava's identities as a mother and a writer was another abyss that I think she sought to bridge through the act of writing. Chava was unrelentingly honest about the fact that her mind occupied a different time and space than the one in which she physically resided. She was disconnected from the present, sometimes going through the motions while remaining immersed in the past. As she herself notes, for nearly 13 years, I led a divided existence. I lived with my family in a Canadian immigrant reality. I was a greenhorn, a mother of two, the daughter of a sick mother. I worked in factories and did all kinds of odd jobs in order to help my husband finish his studies. And I lived in the Lodz Ghetto. My characters interfered with my actions in real life, and even when I did not hold the pen in my mind, their fates intermingled with mine. At the same time, my day-to-day life was always threatening, if not actually to cut the thread of my narrative, then at least to postpone its end. Writing here was the connective tissue and the access point for Chava to a world that had been destroyed, her own living memorial. For Chava, these worlds, as unbridgeable though they appeared, were brought together by placing her children at the heart of her writing project, by realizing that they were the ideal audience she had sought, even if she wasn't fully attuned to this at the time of her writing. Perhaps in saying that these stories belonged to her children, she was offering almost an apology or an offering for not being fully present. Despite our closeness, Baba and I never discussed her aspirations to be a writer or her works of fiction. Baba kept these stories bundled up, and we found them along with Chanele's diary after she passed 2 years ago. Her reticence on this subject may relate to the thread of fear that I found in many of her stories, the fear of not being understood by those who are most precious to her, her own children and grandchildren. For example, in her short story, One of Two, a character who is yearning for connection to her children commits the ultimate betrayal of reading her daughter's secret diary, where she finds these lines that her daughter writes: "They will talk about the ghetto and war, about cities and people I never knew. Why can't they shut up about this already? Why do they have to revive memories? There is life going on around them. Why can't they get involved? In this same story, the mother states about her children, their life is too soft and easy. Everything is handed to them on a golden platter. This is why they don't appreciate it. It was our own fault. We want to give them those things we never had, and this is a mistake. So what precisely is the relationship to the past, the horrible past, that we, their descendants, must have? On the one hand, they can only be glad that we did not suffer as they did. Our only task is to relish life, to be free of the burdens they carry. But on the other hand, their desire for an intimate connection with us demands a certain understanding on our part of what they lived through. They don't want us to stray too far from the Holocaust, from Yiddish, from the knowledge of what humanity is capable of, nor do they want us chained to the past as they were. They want to both draw us near to and shield us from the horrors they witnessed. There is this sense that if the Holocaust experience is not transmitted to us, our lineage, our history, or even humanity itself is doomed. But the more it is transmitted, the more we are asked to stare into that terrible abyss, the very abyss whose edge they, as mothers and grandmothers, are hardwired to keep us from. One thread I've come to see in Baba's writings suggests that part of what it means to be close to someone, to forge close relationships with family in particular, is the constant asking for and telling or retelling of stories to each other. As a grandmother, Baba was generous in telling her own stories to me, but also equally in her inquiries regarding my own life. In bits and pieces, she describes her relationships with loved ones manifesting through the presence or absence of the ability to share stories with one another. On the one hand, she writes, I did not feel close enough to my Bubeshi to say, Bubeshi, tell me a story, although I wanted very much to listen to her stories and knew she had many. And on the other hand, she says, my mother enjoyed sharing her past with me, a strong bond formed between us. And she mourns the inability to share stories with her father, whom she adored so much. She writes, my father did not come back after the war, and I could not ask the millions of questions I had asked of my mother, so I had no opportunity to forge a relationship with him beyond a father-daughter relationship. Baba was always invested in being not just our grandmother, but also our friend, if not quite our peer, then at least our co-conspirator, engaged in an exchange with her grandchildren rather than the one-way street of a wise elder telling and teaching us her lessons. Indeed, this is also how she describes her relationship with her own mother. She writes, my friends adored her, and for me, this was a golden opportunity to get to know her not only as a mother, but also as a woman, as a person, and as a friend. Seeing her mother as a whole person in this way reflected a desire that I believe both Chava and Baba had to be understood and seen as complete, multifaceted individuals, rather than as archetypes of one sort or another. Not just a survivor, not just a mother, not just a grandmother, a teacher, a writer, but someone who is much more than each of these identities. They wanted the same for their children, and they thought it was possible for their descendants to both live their own unburdened lives in the present, while simultaneously carrying the knowledge, if not the weight, of the past. They understood the tension that this way of living could bring, but ultimately, I believe, made peace with it. In reflecting on the incredible legacies of Chava and Baba, I'm sitting with the way in which every act of writing and telling is always already an act of translation. And stories aren't static. They are continually reshaped and retold. Every translation is always just a reflection of a certain moment in time. What I feel them both saying through their works is that translation is an act that will always fail, but it will also always be worth the effort. That part of what it means to be human and part of what it means to be connected to others is to not dwell alone in your sorrows, but to share them with others, even and especially if they can't fully understand them, and even and especially if you don't want the other to take on your specific sorrow. Translation will always fail, but will always be worthwhile. A partial but sturdy bridge is better than a broken bridge. As Chava writes in Confessions of a Yiddish Writer, but the ghost of my father, or perhaps Shayevich, takes hold of my hand. Enough, they say, you will never express it all, Be content that you have said this much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for personal lectures. It was great pleasure to listen these lectures. And now we would like to invite all our guests for 20 minutes break. And we will meet here, and after the break, Joanna Podolska will conduct a discussion with the family, and there will be time for questions from audience. So now 20 minutes break. There is
No vodka. Vodka it will be later.
Make corrections.
I think today.
So who's that's the moderator.
Because the. No, yeah. Okay, wszystkie są chyba dobre. Sorry, in Polish.
This one I think is not.
Yes. I think they are.
This one isn't.
Yes. Raz, dwa. Of course. Yes. So once again, I want to welcome you on our conference. And I would like to welcome, I saw, yes, our friends from Łódzki Szlak Kobiet here, Ewa Burzałek and Iza Olejnik, who were fighting for a street of Chava Rosenfarb. And it will be quite successful, so in the end of our conference we will open, not street, just a small passage, but it will be there, and it's also thanks to them. Once again, I want, because we are also on internet, so I want to present Goldie Morgentaler, Adele, Reinhartz, and Mordecai, Walfish, who they were presented the papers before the break, and we would like to continue. And because it is also a conference for you, so you are welcome to ask questions as well. But I ask also to the table now Abraham Morgentaler and Abraham Reinhartz, and we have almost all family, not everybody, because it is a few people here, and so it will be possible also to talk. Actually, honestly, I had completely different idea, and I think how to make this conversation. But I started what Abraham yesterday during his lecture in Polish Academy of Science presented, and he started with his brain when he was 5 years old. So in his brain he had food, he had sleep, he had enjoy the toys or play, and one more thing, lodge, or łódź in Polish. And it is something what, of course, for us, we are from Łódź, so it was something really very touching. And for us, Chava Rosenfarb is a writer who was, she had this gene, and of course Henia as well. And I want to start, it's not yet coming to your lectures, but we will come back. But I would like to ask about this gene. How łódź, lodge, is in your personal imagination? Because not when you remember from your childhood, so it was my question, how do you remember it? It was in your imagine, and does it change? Or it is some kind of permanent idea of this lodge, which native city of your mothers, fathers, or grandmothers and fathers. So what it is, or what it was? Anybody wants first?
So like my cousin, we grew up in my brother and I grew up in a household where lodge loomed large. And what I absorbed was a kind of a dissonant picture. When our mother would talk about her life before the war, it was in very warm and positive terms, with a lot of nostalgia, a lot of conversation about, let's say, the restaurant where her father worked, about the Medemschule, about just everyday life. And then came the period of the ghetto, which was always, described, of course, as a time of tremendous hardship. And then that was it, because after the war, they didn't come back to Poland. So when we were growing up, I had the sense of Poland as a whole, and Lodz in particular, of existing only in black and white, because all of the photographs were in black and white, and it was had an ambiguous place in our family history. So when we came to Poland as a family with our parents 20 years ago, for the first moment it was shocking to me that it was in color, because in my imagination it was always in black and white. And coming 20 years ago and coming now again changed my impression of Lodz. It became a real place for me. And in part because we met you and we met other people that allowed me to see it in a broader perspective than what was filtered through our mother's experience.
So Henia wants, they started.
So when we came back here 20 years ago, we took a walk through the ghetto, I think with you.
Yeah.
And we stopped at Lagownicka, which is where my mother and Chava and others lived and where they hid. And my mother decided that we should have a look at the place where they lived. So we walked up the stairs. She knew exactly where it was, and she went up to the door and knocked. And the person living there opens the door and sees a swarm of people looking at him, and he wonders, what's going on. And so my mother explained to him what the story was, and he took her hand and kissed it, and took us into the apartment where we saw where they lived, and it was tiny. It was a very generous thing for that gentleman to do for us, because it gave us an image of what we've only heard about. So it gave some concreteness to the imagination. And my parents, later on in life, after they retired, they translated a book by Arnold Mostovich, who was a physician in the ghetto, which interested me quite a lot. And it was called With a Yellow Star and the Red Cross. And that gave an interesting look at the day-to-day, what was going on in the day-to-day life of Lodz before the war, and this Dr. Mostovich's experiences in the ghetto as a physician.
But when you were a child, how do you remember it? When it is also my question. So in your imagine, how look, as I understand, black and white, it was something, or black, or white.
It was always there. It was always there. It was just a fixture in our household. It was always there. The war was always there. My parents' peer group were all survivors, and so the war and Lodz and the experience and the Bund was a large presence ever since I can remember. I don't think I sang the Shvua in the delivery room, but anyway, but it was a presence in our life forever. We went to a Yiddish school, which was run by the Arbeiter Ring, which is a Bund organization, and the summer camps we went to. So much of our lives was immersed in the lives in the life of Poland during the war.
We talked about how Lodz was in our brains from the start. I have to preface this comment, Joanna, by saying that every single person that we've met here has been marvelous. and kind and generous with us and welcoming. But you know, the lodge that was in my mind growing up was a place that was very dark. There were monsters in the shadows, and the year was always 1944. With the stories that were part of my childhood that were always there were the stories that included hiding behind the fake wall, trying to avoid being discovered by the Nazis. And I had an endless fascination with that. Of course, those were the Nazis, they weren't the Poles, but it's such a different experience in reality. Adele's husband, Barry, just asked me, I have 2 daughters, and Adele and Barry have 3 of their kids here. And Barry said, what about your daughters? Do you think of bringing them? And I had to say to him, I said, you know, it never occurred to me. And I'm not proud of this necessarily, because this is my mother who's being honored. And, but, you know, it's difficult for me to be here. So for me, this was such a dark story in my life that I've spent much of my life trying to not immerse myself in it, but rather to sort of, as Mordecai was talking about, you know, I think when you were reading it, right, it was even in your mother's words as if written for somebody else. Enough already. Enough already. Can we get on with the next life, with the current life? And frankly, that's how I've lived my life. I know enough about everything that happened. How could I not? Because it was in the air as we grew up, but it was heavy for me. And the nice thing is for me, it's marvelous to be here now in the year 2023 and to see Łódź or Lodz as it is now and not as it was when in my mind's eye growing up.
My question was not because I wanted to listen to compliment, but of course I am. It's very nice, but it is what Adele said, that it is black and white. So I am very curious about this white, because sometimes when I speak with especially children of survivors who has a lot of good memories as well, but second generation mostly only this black. Because you said that you remember this Łódź from 1944, but it was before 36, or maybe, I don't know, it was when she was teenager, when she, as yesterday I told that we are going to park, Poniatowski Park, and they were going for meetings with boys, you know, whatever, something light before. But for you, it was this connection, always, this black.
Well, I knew those stories too. You know, they were a little bit romanticized, it seemed to me. There was a lot of sentimentality about what life was like before the war. I think it was, you know, the comparison for my mother and my father talked about it less, but some was stark, right? It was, you know, and even their childhood stuff, they had some difficulties as well. You know, and again, I hate to bring up the past, but, you know, this is the reality. You're asking us sort of what it was. You know, my father had stories about even before the war, about being in school and how some of the Polish kids would bully him and how he would take a special way home when they lived one place so that he would avoid the Polish boys pulling down his pants and determining that he was Jewish because he was circumcised. You know, that there was this baseline, for a child hearing these stories, there was some baseline terror associated with this. Mm-hmm. So yes, there was pretty stuff and they had good times before the war, but for a child hearing these stories, this was like a place I would never ever want to come to. And one of the things that I hope I expressed for those of you who were there yesterday is that it is the way that this explodes my mind to be in Lodz in 2023, honoring my mother and also father and our families, is just, it's hard to put it into words what that means. It's incredible. Goldie captured, I think, a lot of it in her description of being here now on the centenary, but it's never, ever, ever in my life did I ever expect that there would be Number one, that we would be here all together as an extended family, and number two, that we would have an opportunity to honor our families and our parents in this way. And I'm very appreciative of it, but boy, it's a little strange.
Goldie, would you like to tell us something about this gene of Lodz?
I don't know that I have much to add to that. My mother always described Lodz as very dirty because of the factories, full of factories. But she also had a bit, as I said in my talk, she had a lot of nostalgia for it. My father didn't like to talk about Lodz, but I always thought that I belonged to Lodz, that I lived there, that it was in my head. It was a place that I felt like, that it was mine. And I got a big shock once when I was working one of my first jobs at Columbia Library, and I heard some people speaking Polish at the library. There were workers there, and I went up and I told them very proudly, my parents are from Poland, from Lodz. And they start to speak to me in Polish, which I don't understand. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm not Polish, I'm Jewish. And I could see that there was a change. But to me, like, I belong to this country, I belong to this city in my head. And it was because of our family talking always about this city. And my uncle, my father's younger brother, he missed the city terribly. And all his memories, as he would say, I passed so-and-so on this street, and so-and-so lived on that street. And because he was the youngest of the four of our parents, he constantly talked about Lodz. So it was a presence, as I said, a presence in our lives.
But actually your mother was all the time writing about Lodz.
Yes.
Each book, Tree of Life and Bociany and Abrasha and poetry. I am just discovered poetry of your mom, of Chava Rosenfarb, because we have translated it this year. And I noticed that almost in each of poem you can discover or street of Łódź or places, something. So it is. Mordecai, is it something different for you? How it is Łódź or Lodz for you?
Yeah, I think it was probably less potent for me than it was for this generation. I think by the time I came along, at least Henya was much more focused on trying to explain to me how lucky I was to live in Canada, how Canada is this country that, you know, welcomed our family. I do remember like this big volume on the Lodz Ghetto, sitting very prominently on their shelf. So I think for me, it was not as potent. It kind of unfolded slowly over time. And I think I initially became curious about Lodz because it was presented as a bit of a utopian site for the Bund, and in particular a place where kind of social justice and workers' rights and intellectual life can live together. And I think I always got the sense from them that in Canada they felt like those two things had to be separate. You had to choose the life of either the intellectual or social justice, and that Lodz was a site where it was all very connected. I do recall that there was this desire on Henya's part to want to keep Lodz far away in memory, and it was us that really pressed her to want to come and visit, say like, this is a place that's important to you, please come. And she made it sort of, okay, only for your sake I'm going to come. And she ended up absolutely loving it and loving all the people that she met and loving showing us her home. And there was this sense of pride and ownership. I think she initially approached the trip with some distance, but as soon as she landed, it was very much like, this is my place, this is my home.
I just want to add that I think that the different impressions have to do with the ages of our mothers. So when the war began, because our mother was born in 1926, when the war began, she was not yet 13. And so her memories are just very personal, you know, and looking back on childhood, whereas Chava was 3.5 years or so older, already an adolescent, already developing a kind of a critical perspective, and I think that accounts for at least some of the difference.
So my question is also about it, how you already said before our break about it, how it was at home, and that Chava was the writer, and it was of course well known and appreciated by the family. But did you ever talk to Chava, like at home, about books? About so what it was exactly? Did you ask detailed questions about it, or you wanted to know? My question generally is about it. So, did you read Chava Rosenfarb book, Tree of Life, for instance, as a literature, or do you write it as a personal, very family story?
Both of those things. I think there was an earlier translation attempt when I was in my early 20s, maybe, that she involved me in. She had sent me some of the handwritten translation that I think she had probably prepared. And I read through Tree of Life in manuscript, her handwriting. And so this created this kind of experience. On the one hand, it's gripping. It was just gripping as a novel. And at that time, I didn't really associate it so closely with the family, but it was an amazing experience to read it in her handwriting with the crossings out, and she wanted me to make suggestions, which I felt completely incompetent to do at that point. But now when I read it very much as the family story. And I'm rereading it now because of Chanele's diary, because I think that her books, Chava's books, will help fill in or answer some of my questions about things described in the diary.
The same question to you. So is it books by Chava are mostly books, or it is family stories?
I want to answer that, and I want to answer my cousin. The thing that you have to be careful with, with Tree of Life is it's fiction, and it's hard to know who. So one of the characters is clearly based on my mother. It's autobiographical. Her name is Rachel Eibushitz, and the name Eibushitz is a dead giveaway. But the other characters and what else is going on, to me, it's impossible to know how this related to her personal life.
We can tell you.
You can tell. So when she was already older, I begged her, and I think Mordecai quoted from her autobiography. I begged her to write her autobiography so that I could know what was real and what was fiction. And she began. She wrote about 10, 11 pages, and then she said to me, I can't go on. My life is in my books, but which is fine. There is a lot of truth to that, but the problem is that a lot of it is fiction that she transposed from one person to another. She did that in all her fiction. So I guess all I'm saying is you have to be careful about what you think might have happened. The actual events happened, but the characters and what they're thinking and what they're doing, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'll share that I didn't read any Chava Rosenfarb until I was in my 20s, and I only encountered it as literature and fiction until Confessions of a Yiddish Writer came out. And what's interesting to me is I, in my 20s, was very immersed in different Yiddish communities, and I'd always heard this narrative in the family of like, no one reads Chava, no one's heard of Chava. Like all of her stuff is, and there, if you tell anyone you're related to Chava Rosenfarb, you're a celebrity. And so like my first experience was like people just being deeply familiar and in awe of that connection, the familial connection. But when I would read her fiction, it felt like incredible literature to me. And then I remember when you translated Confessions of a Yiddish Writer, how excited I was. Like, finally, I can actually understand. But of course, I know it's much more porous now. But at the time, for me, it felt more like literature than her life.
Do you want to add something about it? And maybe one more question, and you are very welcome also to participate in the discussion. So this relation between Henia and Chava, it looks so sweet. The sister, is it so sweet? You know, it is always the shadow of something. So, but when you presented today, even my colleague from university said, "My God, is it really?" Especially, wow, it is so beautiful. Everybody is so sweet to each other. How? Tell us something. Okay, we will cut from it. So how was it?
It's
okay, of course it is complicated.
And there was an element of not necessarily sharing certain things beyond the family, I suppose. But in general, it was. And certainly, you know, when we were growing up, well, we spent a lot of time together as families, summer vacations and other holidays. And our mother always talked about, Chava was the closest person. And how going through the war experience, the Holocaust experience together, cemented those relationships between the sisters, but also with our grandmother. And this emerged when I was a teenager. My mother, and I wasn't, objectively speaking, I wasn't so difficult, but she kept saying, except to my younger brother, she said she had no blueprint for this. She couldn't afford, because she was in the ghetto from the ages of 13 to, ghetto and concentration camp, ages of 13 to 19, her entire adolescence, that she couldn't afford conflict. So, you know, when we had brother-sister issues, disagreements, or between my mother and me, she didn't have a way of managing it. It was very distressing to her, much more distressing than I think, you know, my peers experienced with their Canadian-born mothers. But for the most part, you know, they were really extremely, extremely close. There were, you know, because our mother also enjoyed writing and wanted to progress with this, there was a little bit of this sense that it wasn't her role in the family. Chava had the role of the writer, capital W. It was core to Chava's identity. And I think our mother felt sometimes that there wasn't room for that, for her to develop, because of Chava's the centrality of being a writer to Chava's own identity.
And could you tell a few words about, because it is not only presentation on our conference, but there are more plans about this story about Chanele diary.
Yeah.
And as I understand, Henia will appear as an author.
She already appears as an author.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, of the diary.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I don't see another possibility other than Henia being the author, but she wrote other things too. They were both actually writing columns for the Brussels, for the Yiddish newspaper, and I have some of these columns both from Chava and also from Henia. And perhaps I will include some of this in this volume as well, the book that will be published.
Yes, so can you tell when it will be published?
Oh, well, when I finish doing it. I do have a contract with Yale University Press. They have a series, a Holocaust series. They're very interested in this. So the book will include a translation of the diary with annotations. I will explain the historical events and, you know, assuming that the readership won't know necessarily. And it will include a longer version of what I presented here and what I'm presenting at other conferences as well. And I hope within 2 years.
Just one sentence, that honestly, when I am writing and I am trying to find the many information about real life, I checked the book of Henia to see it, how she presented the same stories. For instance, how the apartment looks on Żeromskiego. It's much better, I found in Henia description. I did not find in Hava books or essay. So it is already, it's very interesting to see these two voices. I'm sorry, yes.
Well, I would just add that I was talking to Mordecai. Bits and Pieces is actually an invaluable part of me understanding what happened. Because everything, you know, in my mother's writing was so novelistic, right? It's like, but what actually happened? And your mom puts that down very clearly. But I had a question for you. It seems to me that post-war, things were chaotic. And you know, like my father went to medical school in Germany, claimed to have finished high school. He hadn't, but nobody had papers. And is it or is it not, as you were speaking, you know, I wondered whether it was possible that somebody found that diary and somehow gave it to your mother, and there's no notation around it or something like that?
I've tried every scenario in my mind as to how this could be. And the reason that I think if that had been a story, that my mother would have, you know, Henia would have said that at the beginning and at the end. And because she claimed to do this, you know, to have found the pages and straightened them out and cried over them and so on, not knowing that she hadn't gone back, I think if there had been some other way that she acquired the diary, she would have said that. The other clue is that she's not mentioned. If Chanele had really written it, she would have named Henia, as her close friend. So my mother, so the close friend is named Rivka, but it's clearly my mother. She says so at the end. And the other thing is that many of the stories that are in the diary are in bits and pieces. And so she, of course, she and Chanele, according to the diary, worked in the same place. So, and some of the stories are set in the resort where they worked, in the carpentry factory, but they're the same stories. So there are a few hints like that. But I do think, and there's a very different tone between the first 20 pages and the rest of it. And that's why I'm very attracted to this idea that they read each other's diaries. The first 20 pages or so, Rivka doesn't appear. And it's only about Chanele and Motel and the father and these kinds of things. So that's why I put it together like that. But I wish I had known about it to be able to ask. So
anybody can find the Henia book in internet, in French and in English. I discovered it just accidentally. Could you Goldie, tell something? Because just a few weeks ago, short stories of your mom appeared. Could you tell something? What do you plan? Of course, Abrasha letters. Probably it will be in Polish before the English translation. But what are in plans? Because it's still, you have a lot of material, a lot of things by Hava.
About letters to Abrasha?
Yeah. No. My question is, what do you work on to be published by
From
Hava?
my mother?
Yes.
So the last thing that is not published in English or another language is letters to Abrasha. That's the last thing. I don't think there's anything. Even my mother at some point had to, there comes an end. And I think there is nothing else. The book of short stories just appeared, and it's about Holocaust survivors in Canada, mostly in Canada, and what their lives were like. And it includes what I think is an incredible story called Edja's Revenge, which is told from the point of view of a capo. And I think some of the papers here are going to be...
It will be 3 papers tomorrow, I think.
About Edja. So, but I think once Abrasha is finished, I haven't found anything else that needed to be translated.
Letters.
Oh, I have letters. The letters, thank you. So I have letters between my mother and her best friend from Lodz, Zhenya, who became in Sweden. They separated, the two women separated after the war. And Zhenya went to Stockholm, to Sweden rather, and my mother went to Canada. But they continued writing to each other. And they wrote in Polish because Zhenya didn't speak Yiddish. And I have, my translator is here, is Krzysztof. And so I thought first I wrote an article about the two women, and then I thought I'd get the letters translated, and the manuscript is now with a publisher, but if they'll accept, I don't know yet.
Yes, and as I know, is it Urszula Chowaniec with us? Yes, and we hope to listen to, yes, and Mr. Schwarz tomorrow, or after tomorrow, we will have also a lecture about Zhenya and letters. But what about the other letters? Do you have some collection of letters maybe? I'm sorry, I'm very curious.
If you start translating letters, you'll never finish.
If you have Polish, we are working on, but in Yiddish,
I have a million letters, and a lot of them are Polish.
All of you have a work, you know? Okay.
A lot of people that she knew. Someone here, his name was Gellerman. I don't remember his first name. They corresponded constantly, and he was, I think, a high official in the Communist Party after the war. And the one time she came back to Poland, she stayed with him. And she was very nervous because she had information that he wasn't supposed to know. But they corresponded. He eventually ended up in Australia, and they still corresponded in Polish. So I have a lot of letters in Polish still.
Very good. We are very curious. Please ask a question. The last is, did you talk at home Yiddish, both homes, and during the parties, meetings all together? You spoke Yiddish together?
Our parents always spoke Yiddish, and among their friends also. The picture that Mordecai showed with their group of friends. These were frequent gatherings in our home, and Yiddish was huge.
You have something to tell.
I broke the mold. So Yiddish was my first language, but when I was something like 3 or 4, the story is that we were on, I believe, Cape Cod in the United States on a beach, and I was playing with a little boy who was American, and he's talking to me in English, and I'm talking to him in Yiddish, and he got frustrated, and he went to my parents, and he said, "Doesn't he speak language?" And my father decided it was time to teach me English, and I really have very little Yiddish left.
Do you still understand or not?
I understand a few words.
Okay. With children, Mordecai, did you learn Yiddish at home?
No, we would speak Hebrew and English at home, actually. And so a couple of us have it learned as adults, but we didn't speak it at home.
So please, would you like to ask questions or just give reflections? Yes.
Thank you. I have a question that maybe you could also answer, Joanna, if you've done some research. I'm quite interested in whether any of the writings of Chava or any discussions you had at home talked about Lodz before the ghetto. What were the relationships between the Polish non-Jews and Jews until this happened? And was it really the German influence, or was there anti-Semitism rampant in Poland before the Nazis took over? And a second part of my question is, now how in Lodz are there people like you that are interested in reconnecting with the past of the Jewish community here? What has motivated you to make this incredible gesture of sort of reconciliation? Because in Canada, we're doing a lot of reconciliation right now with our First Nations people, but they're still living in Canada, whereas here, it seems that the Jews mostly have left.
No. Oh my God. So it is very complicated, complex question. It's easier for me the second one, of course. I just started to be interested in Jewish Lodz many years ago, and when I was on scholarship in United States, in Washington, Holocaust Museum, I discovered Tree of Life in English. So I learned it, and I thought that it is a book we should know here, and it should be translated. And it was, and I'm sure that how we read Chava Rosenfarb is completely different. How you read it, you, family, and also scholars, completely different way. For me, because I used to be journalist and I was writing about the history of a city, for me topography is very important. So it is what you know, I was trying to show you the places and I told you how she was doing. So for us, it shows us a different face of the city. We learn a lot how was the relationship, the Jewish really life. And honestly, and it is also the answer from you, I think, honestly, Chava did not write too much about the Polish-Jewish relation, not as much as you expected. For some reason, we can tell that it is a book about Jewish life. Yes, Tree of Life is, it's not too much. Of course, it could be only in the first volumes, but it is. There are some descriptions of conflicts, like you said, the situation of young boys who had a problem to come back and these kind of things. But also, honestly, Chava explained in her book that she had no Polish friends. But it is only part of true. It is true for Chava, because she was in Yiddish house, in a Bundis circle. She was going to Bundis kindergarten, Bundis school. At home, they speak Yiddish. Going out with other children to a Bundis organization. So it is very normal that they did not have connection with the Polish one. And we have many examples of Jewish kids here in Łódź who are from Bundis. Today, some people visited the Jewish cemetery with us, with Milena, what she said. That, for instance, Margolis, Alexander Margolis, who was a doctor, before the war, he was very active Bundist, but he didn't speak Yiddish, and he was a Bundist activist. But her daughter, his children, they were sent to Polish schools. So Alina Margolis Edelman, by the way, I recommend you to see exhibition on the first floor on Alina Margolis Edelman. She had many Polish friends, and her language was Polish. She didn't speak Yiddish. So you know, it's very much depends what family, how to say, circle is. But they were also, of course, the first your question is more complex, and of course they were different situation, and it was not that anti-Semitism became together with German when they came. No, it was anti-Semitism. It was many gesture of anti-Semitism, and it was some very bad situation, and it was Łódź was quite a good place. But I don't know if we have here. I saw before Paweł Spodenkiewicz. Oh, probably because before we had also historians who are working on this Jewish life before the war. So of course it is for a next conference. You are very invited. What else I want to tell? I think it is very, no, I don't want to tell that it's very bad, but why this conference I think is important? Because we always do one side. You are in your circle, I mean, you are the Jewish people are speaking in the circle, and you know your part, and we know our part. And sometimes it is no connection. So it is more important to have more connection between and to know more, because it is not that you are wrong or we are wrong. We just see something in a different way. That's why I said, for me, it is what I said in the beginning, why I think to show Chava Rosenfarb to Polish audience is so important, especially here, because it just shows the different group of people, different point of view. It is not better or our better, etc. But it is a richness of diversity. That's, yes, we are in a dialogue center, exactly. So it is important.
Thank you so much. I have a question specifically because this is a conference about 20th century Jewish women writers. My question is about gender. And this is a question for Goldie and for Adele. My first question is, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the sexism that Chava faced as a Jewish woman writer. Specifically, I loved the quote that you gave, "I am a writer," she would say. She would proclaim when people would, claim she was just working at home alone. So I was wondering if you could speak about that. And Adele, I was wondering if you could speak about how you mentioned how diaries and memoirs have been marginalized. They're also gendered writing forms. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that as well. Thank you.
About the discrimination my mother faced as a woman, I don't even know where to begin. So I'll give you an example of somebody who was actually trying to help her and very friendly to her, and that man is Melech Ravitch, who's a well-known Yiddish poet and general. He did a lot for Yiddish literature. So when he read the manuscript of Tree of Life in Yiddish, and I guess he liked it because he said, I found among my mother's papers, he sent out advertisements to all the Jewish communities, especially Bundes communities in Australia, wherever. He was looking for money to help publish the book, and he assured everyone that this was an amazing book. There was not a trace of hysteria in it. So that gives you a sense of what she was up against. I would also, if you know the Goldene Kite, the Sutzkever's literary journal, there are very few women in there. There are some, but very, very few. And the notorious example is Irving Howe's, Irving Howe and I think his name was Harold Greenberg, published an anthology of Yiddish short stories in English in translation. There's not one woman writer in that entire collection. So I think that while my mother managed to break through that kind of prejudice, one reason was because she started with poetry. And poetry was supposed to be a woman's literary form. And the other reason that I think she was given a bit more credibility than she might have had otherwise is that she was writing about the Holocaust. And it was, in a sense, for Yiddish newspapers and magazines, this was like a voice from back there, right, from the real thing. So the fact that she was a woman maybe counted against her a little bit less than it might have otherwise. But I also think that one of the reasons she couldn't publish, took forever to publish The Tree of Life in English, was also because, first of all, strange name, a writer no one's heard of, and she's a woman, right? So all of these things sort of told against her.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to say about it in terms of my mother's writings. For the Association of Jewish Studies conference that takes place in December, I proposed a paper. You know how you propose a paper long before you've written it. I usually, dash off, I kind of fabricate an abstract and a title, and then, a few months later I'll write the paper. So I had proposed a paper for a session, and the paper was entitled something like Chanele's Diary the intersection of gender and age in the Lodz Ghetto, something like that. Sounded like a good title. So I went through the diary, to just start writing the paper, and there was a lot of material there to consider the life of adolescent girls and the idea of, physical development, entering, puberty, first relationships with boys and things like that, and the importance of female peer groups. But I didn't find anything, aside from those themes, that would relate to gender in terms of the social life of these young people. So the leaders of the city, for example, mentioned explicitly are Motel, Chanele's older brother, and Bono plays a large role in, and they were in the leadership. But there were lots of female names in this whole group. So I didn't really find anything to grasp onto in terms of that particular document. What I do recall, talking to my mother when I was already an adult as well, this was a socialist movement, and one that, at least as she put it, paid lip service to equality between men and women, but it didn't work out that way. It wasn't like that in the actual experience of the organization. And I think she was a little bit frustrated by that. But in her writing, she tends to romanticize. That's true in the memoir bits and pieces, and it's a little bit true in the diary as well.
I'm very sorry, but I think I should finish now this conversation, because we have a concert very soon and banquet. But we will have 2 days to talk. Tomorrow is all panel about Chava Rosenfarb books, and I think it will be also gender context. We have here Łódzki Szlak Kobiet, which is, how you translate it into English? Women Trade Foundation, okay. So it is to continue, maybe they will join us tomorrow. And so I would like to thank you very much for your presentations first. It was very interesting, and for your presence here. And I would like to ask you for a short break now. Okay, so we have 15-20 minutes, and we come back here for the concert, inspired by poetry by Chava Rosenfarb, and after banquet. So thank you very, very much.